The views expressed on this podcast are Peter Dekom's opinions based on his legal experience, research, and academic work. The podcast does not offer legal advice. For any legal matters, always consult an independent attorney who can assess your specific situation. And now, on with the show.
Hi, everyone. It's Peter Dekom again, and I'm going to rant a little bit today and rave and do all kinds of other stuff. I'm pissed, and I'm going to try not to act too pissed, but I'm pissed. A little bit about my background, which I squeeze in bits and pieces about my nefarious past. My real father, biological father, worked on Capitol Hill for a Republican senator from Kentucky, and then he worked on some very nefarious, nasty congressional committees before he wound up being a newscaster and ultimately moving to Delaware and then Pennsylvania to write for the local papers. He was also an art critic for a Philadelphia Inquirer and, a bunch of crazy stuff. I'm not sure it was the Inquirer, but he was on the air. And I remember they sent a picture of the magazine cover with my father balding on it. I got hair. And they said, here's the man you love to hate, because he criticized everybody. He was a son of a bitch. Meanwhile, my stepfather was a Foreign Service officer with 2 PhDs, 3 masters, and 4 bachelor's degrees. A little arrogant, if I do say so myself. He was also worked for the government. He was a Foreign Service officer. We were posted. He used to be consul general to places like Antwerp and Mumbai. Then it was called Bombay. And then we were posted to Beirut, and I've talked a little bit about that in the past. My uncle was a USAID exec, and he'd been in Italy and Greece and Rome and all kinds of stuff like that, and traveled all over the place. Before that, he was a traveling salesman for Kelly Springfield Tires. My mother worked as a Sino-Soviet analyst and a translator for Serbo-Croatian, Bulgarian, and Russian at the Department of State. My son even worked for the government. He was an investment officer with the United States Department of Energy about 10 years ago. And he did stuff like analyze, Tesla. I've heard of them. I'm not my favorite company in the world, but he understood all that stuff. He's gone on into doing more investment activities. But what I'm trying to say is my family came out of Republican roots, and I haven't met a Republican in years who's held public office, because every Republican I meet is espousing a form of politics that I find completely alienating. And I suspect, and I've been writing about a certain guy named Donald who has done so many recent horrific actions, most of which have been set to distract the world from the fact that there's so much in the Epstein files. I don't think he was a direct sexual predator, but he sure as hell seems to be covering up for all his rich cronies. And we know that in Trump land, the United States is divided into 2 categories, winners and losers. If you don't have a lot of money, you can be nice and tolerated if you totally worship the ground he walks on. But if you're rich and you donate to him, you absolutely are a winner. And all the laws, everything he does is going to be to benefit you, so you and he can go out in the world and take it. I'll go into some of that stuff soon, but I'm going to read to you something that was published. Actually, it was Jake Tapper interviewing Stephen, a very major advisor to the president, Stephen Miller, who's in his early 40s, graduate of Duke University, no legal degree, and he makes Rasputin look like a liberal. I mean, I listen to Stephen Miller speak, and he's an authoritarian. He takes care of his people within the government. There's a wonderful article in The Atlantic that talks about him. But he is a tyrant, and he is a Rasputin without any limits. He will defer to the president, but the entire cruel immigration policy that we're witnessing, where people are ripped out of their homes and everything else, the entire attack on Venezuela, which was not about drugs. We have a fentanyl problem. The drugs that are coming from Venezuela, they don't come directly to the United States. They're shipped to other countries. So none of those boats that he blew up and over 100 people killed in those boats, none of those boats were carrying fentanyl. And still, we have that problem. What happens is a lot of the fentanyl is manufactured either in Mexico or in the United States from ingredients that you can obtain in Asia, primarily China. So I'm going to read this little excerpt. I will try and be neutral about reading it aloud, and it's not too short, but it's necessary. Okay, this is Stephen Miller speaking to Jake Tapper on January 5th on CNN. Let me, if you give me the floor for 30 seconds, let me tell you what we're doing here, Jake. The United States is sort of foundational. The United States is using its military to secure our interests unapologetically in our hemisphere. We're a superpower, and under President Trump, we are going to conduct ourselves as a superpower. It's absurd that we would allow a nation in our own backyard to become the supplier of resources to our adversaries, but not to us. To hoard weapons from our adversaries, to be able to be positioned as an asset against the United States rather than on behalf of the United States. Sovereign countries should be able to do whatever they want to do. The Monroe Doctrine and Trump Doctrine, which I guess he wanted to call it the Monroe Doctrine, is all about securing the national interests of America. In effect, what he's saying here, that's the end of the quote, is that might makes right, that we have a right to do anything we want. If it sounds like Vladimir Putin, I will tell you that the actions that we just took in Venezuela are exactly what Vladimir Putin has started a couple of years ago when he marched his troops into Ukraine. He wants to run it. You ever hear anybody in our administration talk about, I want to run Venezuela? Oh, that was Donald Trump. What the hell is he doing running Venezuela? And if he thinks he can run Venezuela, is he going to make it look like the United States? In which case, I would advise all Venezuelans to leave. It will fail. And if you look at our little move in Iraq, which I think had put us between a rock and a hard place, but we were definitely lost that war entirely. You know, it looks like we won. We went in there and liberated it. We took a horrible despot named Saddam Hussein, or as Mr. Bush would call him, Saddam. I sat him down. I had a conversation with him. Okay, I went to school, that guy, whatever. Saddam is a egomaniacal mental case who basically was a Sunni Muslim. Sunni Muslims, if you remember in earlier podcasts, are folks who believe in the Quran literally. You read it literally, that's it, and you should read it as an individual. You don't need an intervening cleric to tell you what it means. It means what it says it is. And that's the Sunni faith. The Shia faith, which is a kind of a way of rebellion against the Sunnis who kind of conquered Persia, basically says, okay, you don't have to read the Quran. You wouldn't understand the Quran anyway, you dumbass. An imam, there aren't any more imams, but they seem to be today the ayatollahs, will tell you what it means and listen to them because they're smart. Sharia law, which everybody thinks emanates from the Quran, comes from desert caravans crossing in the 120, 130, 140 degrees Fahrenheit. And they were basically desperately moving from one grazing area and water hole to another. They call them oases. So the oasis trek, if you have anyone disruptive on that caravan, the entire caravan could starve to death. No adultery, no thievery, nothing can happen there. And if it does, the punishment is instantaneous and harsh. Adultery, you get stoned to death. You steal something, get your hand cut off. You do something nastier, you find a way to be killed or banished. And being banished in the middle of a desert, certain death. So Sharia harshness did not grow from the Quran. It grew from these tribal people going back and forth. So when you think about this, we go to Iraq, we take a Sunni leader representing 20% of the population, who is basically controlling a nation, Iraq, which is 60% Shiite. And we go in there and we say, okay, everybody, y'all get to vote for whoever going to win. And that means if you have majority rule, and a Sunni country suddenly becomes Shiite. Now, Shiites on the planet only represent 20% of Islam. The rest of Islam, for the most part, is Sunni. So what you've got is one major Shiite power on planet Earth, and that's Iran. It's over 90% Shiite. So when you take Iraq and you replace a Sunni government with a Shiite government, no matter what you call it, even you say, well, Iraq's our ally, they're now friends, we built them. No, none of that happened. What happened is Iraq surrendered entirely to the hegemony of Iran. Now, Iran's unraveling because it's a stupid form of governance. They're running out of water, but that's not what this is about. This is about the fact the United States took over a country where we had boots on the ground and we had bureaucrats in the offices in Baghdad. We had all the things we needed to run the country. And Iraq became among the most corrupt countries on planet Earth. It was on the bottom 10 out of 193 countries on the planet. It was in the bottom 10 in terms of integrity. So we basically took a perfectly okay, weird, not a good guy. We faked weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, to pretend as if we were doing something noble. We weren't doing anything noble. So now we're taking Venezuela. We totally screwed up Iraq. I mean, we screwed it up top to bottom. Now, fortunately for us, the homogeneity of the Venezuelans in terms of religion and culture is fairly uniform. It's not like you're having two warring factions religiously. You are having multiple warring factions between, communism, socialism. We have a bunch of right-wing folks who took it over. Maduro started off being a leftist coming from the Hugo Chavez regime, which was basically an uprising, a populist uprising, which was the people taking over. Except the people didn't do so well. 25% of the Venezuelan population left. That's 9 million people that vacated Venezuela. They couldn't take this guy. And the Colombians, there's this international bridge where all the traffic goes, and Venezuelans routinely would go into Colombia if they weren't leaving to shop because you couldn't buy anything. Inflation was so high, and it was an oil economy. Venezuela literally controls 17% of the known reserves of oil on planet Earth. Now, the oil is a little thick and heavy and needs extra refining. It's not perfectly beautiful Brent crude, but it is oil. And it can be refined into perfectly functional diesel or gasoline. Unfortunately, what has happened is since the Hugo Chavez, who began taking over he nationalized American oil companies in Venezuela, started in 1976 and it continued and got cleaned up. So they totally took everybody out by 2004. Only one U.S. company stayed, Chevron. But effectively, oil production, every year, nobody put any money into rebuilding, restoring, or maintaining the drilling wells, the processing plants, the pipes that transported the oil to where it was being processed or to ships. All that infrastructure died. So you basically had a reduction over that period of time of probably 60% of oil capacity stopped. They just couldn't produce it. And maybe as much as 80% of oil capacity reduced. So here you have a country with 17% of the proven oil reserves on planet Earth, basically exporting only enough gasoline and petroleum products, assuming they can even refine them, and a lot of that stuff isn't refined. It has to be shipped out to be refined. Producing 1% of the planet's petroleum products. Now, you know how I feel about climate change. You know how I feel about the future of petroleum. It's, fossil fuels is bad. If I could spank a fuel, it would get a thrashing. Climate change just plain is real, and it's killing us. I've talked about the windmills, as Mr. Trump calls the wind turbines, and we just withdrew from about 65 international organizations. Any international organization that had anything to do with climate change, we're out of there. All the EPA documents and websites no longer mention climate change. Climate change has been banished completely. So here we are going into an oil-rich country. And you'll notice that Mr. Trump is having lots and lots and lots of meetings. He had them before he went in. He didn't talk to Congress. He didn't notify Congress, I'm going in. And if you talk to Bam Bam, oh, I'm sorry, that's AG Pamela Bondi, the personal minion lawyer to Donald Trump and no one else, she basically said, look, we have a warrant for the arrest of Nicolas Maduro, and it's for drug dealing. He's a drug lord. He's a bad guy. He is a bad guy. In fact, if he were scum would have a good name compared to Maduro. I do not like Maduro. He's a disgusting, despicable, murderous brute. There's nothing to be said for him, which makes Trump happy, because that means people who have hated him from the left or from the middle are saying, whoa, we're really glad he's gone. That's not the point. The point is how he went and who's taking over. And if you meet with the oil companies and you tell them, and by the way, gee, look at the donor lists on all the things, campaign donors, building a ballroom donor. By the way, the ballroom is going to be bigger than the White House. All that stuff. Now he's also going to do the West Wing. There'll be more donors. Every donor gets something from the government. Every donor gets something very, very expensive for taxpayers. It'd be much cheaper for taxpayers to pay for it, assuming we wanted to have a monarch's ballroom. We don't, but that may be just my opinion. Everybody else may say, golly gee, Peter, we'd like to have a ballroom because we'd like to dance. And it won't get invited there anyway. So as I go through this stuff, I'm looking at a corrupt regime that is absolutely Venezuela. The military in Venezuela is very well financially compensated by the government because they are effectively Maduro's operatives. So if you look at what Donald Trump is saying he's going to do, I'm going to run Venezuela. Are you going to use the Iraqi model, or are you going to use the Putin taking over Ukraine model? Which of those is good for you? How are you going to run? Are you going to move to Caracas? No, you're going to stay in Washington. Are you moving a large bureaucratic subgroup into Caracas to do your minion work for you? No, you're not doing that. So how are you going to run it? Well, we're going to take the oil. We're already seizing boats that are out there in sanctioned boats, and we're selling the oil. We're picking up, $30 to $50 million worth of oil right away, and that's going to go directly to our bottom line. So I have a title from a blog I've done recently. I'll just read it. I may get back to it later. It's called Looting and Pillaging, an American Tradition Since 2026. Something really disgusting about going into a country, taking its assets and running it for the sole benefit of your own oligarchs and without checking with Congress and pretending as if this is a drug bust. You don't need Congress approval for drug bust, says Bam Bam Bondi. You just go in, and we have a warrant for his arrest. We exercised the warrant. We dropped in a bunch of guys in nice floppy little helicopters. We may have killed about 100 people, and about 32 of them were Cubans. So clearly we must have been doing good. FYI, Marco Rubio's hidden desire his entire life. He is ethnically a Cuban American. And as a lot of very conservative people in Florida will tell you, their hatred of Fidel Castro, long gone, and Cuba is amazing. I've been to Cuba. I had a lot of fun there. It's a great vacation if you can get the trip. I guess now it's a much more difficult trip to get there, but I sure had a lot of fun. But anyway, Cuba is 100% dependent on Nicaraguan oil. And Marco knows that. And so I think one of the things he's got on a front burner is to effectively bring Cuba to its knees by depriving it of Venezuelan oil, making sure U.S. military ships under the Secretary of Machismo, Pete Hegseth, make sure that anybody coming in there with oil is going to be spanked before they get anywhere near the country. And so I'm looking at this and thinking, okay, America first, America first, America first. Is first spelled F-I-R-S-T, or is it like a name, F-U-R? I'm not sure. But I'm looking at the fact that we've never had, job openings have slid down to one of the lowest levels in 5 years. Prices are going up like crazy. We reworked our labor numbers from 2025. We were off by a very large number. It's much worse than anyone can imagine. And the Epstein documents, anybody seen any? Huh? I mean, I remember when Bam Bam Bondi was saying, I got the Epstein documents on my desk. Really? That's a nice thing. I'm glad you have that. But how come since they were on your desk, you couldn't just ship them over to Congress? Oh, we have to redact them. So you have this guy, Mikey. I someday hope I can do anything that Donald Trump wants me to do that he hasn't asked me for already, because I follow orders. I have a little thing planted in my brain. Mr. Trump doesn't have to call me and demand anything of me. He just sends me these radio signals into this thing I planted in my brain. I have no personality on my own. I pretend to hide behind God as a religious person, but I'm using God to inflict cruelty on the world, and I'm absolutely covering up for pedophiles. I don't think God will like that, but if I frame it properly, nobody will care. So he literally recessed Congress for more than a month, I got close to 2 months, in order to avoid an Epstein vote. Well, they had a deadline of December 19th to deliver, and they didn't. And it's pretty damn clear as you look at it. First of all, Trump did go to the island 8 times, according to official itineraries. He said he'd never been there. There are too many lies. And I used to trust the government, not 100%. You always hold back a little bit of skepticism. But my family worked for the government. I spent a summer job, I admit, at the embassy in Beirut working for the government. I actually had friends who were, when I went to school with them, they wind up in very important positions in different parts of the government. I trusted them. I worked for the state of New Mexico creating their film incentive program, and I spent a lot of time with Bill Richardson, who wound up Secretary of Commerce. I trusted Bill Richardson. But I have to say, a mouth opens from Washington and words come out. The last thing on this planet that emanates from my throbbing body is trust. I don't trust jack shit anything that comes out of that government anymore. And I look at the fact that, I did a lot of stuff. I've done it before. I talked about a nation of laws versus a nation by law. And we are clearly becoming a nation by law. By law means somebody in a powerful position is using legal mandates, most of which are that person or individual creates, to control other people. The laws are not coming from the people. They're coming from this hierarchical top. And you have to do what they say. We see that in Russia. We see that in China. We see that in Iran, North Korea, and Washington, D.C. And this pisses me off because that's not the country I grew up in. I'm a lawyer. I take the Constitution very seriously. I do not agree with the current Supreme Court. I think they need to go back to school and read what they got. And I think the guy who really, really ought to have his law degree confiscated is J.D. Vance. I'm ashamed that he has a Yale law degree. I didn't go to Yale Law School, but I was an undergraduate. But this is a guy who will tell you that ICE officers operate with absolute immunity. Huh? That means they can shoot anybody they want to, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're a citizen? Well, you could go very quickly from being a citizen to being a dead citizen. And if you were killed by an ICE officer, nothing you can do about it. Because we're going to start talking about some of the stuff that happened the last couple of days, and it defines the world. So start looking at the law. Can a country just go and take over another country? Let's say it wasn't attacked, it wasn't defending itself. What does international law say about this? And one of my close friends, Fair Barkley, who's a PhD and a former newscaster, did a series of articles which are on, Barkley Media, and she analyzed what is international law. Well, if you fight a war and you win, you can shoot and hang the losers. But if you're trying to use the law as an index of how to get something done, where do you go to get it enforced? The United States doesn't recognize the police powers of the International Criminal Courts. It doesn't recognize anything outside of the Geneva Convention. So what you've got, you're breaking the law. No, you can't enter a country. United Nations Charter was designed specifically against that. And we're going to go back in time and look a little bit at the historical precedents here. But you're not allowed to go and take countries. You're not allowed to go in another country and take all their valuables and run off and say, I'm happy now. That's against international law. Absolutely violates international criminal law. But the next question is, so what are you going to do about it? And that's one of the things Fair writes about in her articles. You can look them up. And I will tell you that the answer is, unless you win, nothing. Unless other countries will arrest your leaders, nothing. Donald Trump knows that. There is no way to enforce the law internationally. There is a way to enforce the law domestically. So when he goes into Venezuela, you have this Don Roe doctrine, where you can go in and do anything you want, even as a Security Council blasts the United States for seizing Maduro and, in effect, taking over entire Venezuelan everything. It wasn't just a bust. And by the way, it wasn't regime change either, even though that's what Trump called it. Huh? What was it, Peter? It was leadership change. And he's keeping the entire government of Venezuela very corrupt, very, very brutal. Police are currently arresting people in Venezuela who cooperated with the United States in locating and helping us take Maduro. They're arresting them, and we're not doing a damn thing to stop that because we don't care. The entire top of the government is still there. The only thing missing is Maduro, and he's got this lovely vice president who thinks she's president. And we basically said, you don't do what we want, we'll take you out. We've done it with Maduro. You don't think that you're going to get away with it. We'll get you too. So what we've got here is a very interesting historical reality. And you probably weren't around in the 17th and 18th and even 19th century. So I doubt that you were there, unless you do a little reincarnation action. But what you used to have is very, very, very monarchical countries, whether it's France with Napoleon, he'll pull your bone apart, or whether you're dealing with, Prussia, which became Germany, or Austro-Hungarian Empire. These countries would ally with each other and then attack another one, and then they would break apart. And these wars were constantly fighting. Alliances were constantly being made and broken. But what was going on was this political might makes right phenomenon, where we had countries create these alliances to protect unknown assets. They would make up something and say, well, we're protecting such and such. We're protecting our monarchy from these Bolsheviks. Bolsheviks were radical leftists, and they really were radical leftists. But everybody had a reason to kill somebody else, and they would always blame someone else and then use that blame as a damn good reason to go in and conquer them. It was a time when, European diplomacy was what emanated after wars. Napoleon got toasted after, he conquered all kinds of stuff, took stuff, and then he had to spend some quality time on some islands, I'm told. And then we had the French Revolution in 1789, but don't worry, Napoleon came back. Not necessarily in a good way, and the new Napoleons, the heirs of the Napoleon Empire, took over. And you had, it goes back to Spanish Inquisition. It didn't matter what it was, religious wars, you're going to crusades to conquer the heathens. Everyone was fighting everybody. And some of those wars, like 30 years, 100-year wars, it's people growing up never knowing other than these guys are your enemies, so eventually you're going to go and do that stuff. And we literally were fighting wars, and the country with the most modern military technology generally won. The UK did very well, but oddly enough, the rich conqueror of countries and colonies with major assets was Holland. The Dutch East India Company was there a long time before the British East India Company came. And all these companies were looting and pillaging colonies, having people effectively working as slaves, mining and pulling rubber and gold and silver and looking for eternal life, whatever that stuff was. I don't think he ever found it, but it could have been Ponce de Leon, but it was only Ponce de Leon. Sorry. All you Floridians, I know you love that and you're very excited about it. I'm not. But we're going back there. And all those factional battles were going on one hand, and the United States started something. And it was Thomas Jefferson reading Francis Bacon and Thomas Locke and a lot of philosophers. And as I said, he wasn't particularly religious, but he was taken with a modernity, a modern concept. And we lived in a period of enlightenment where critical thinking, intellectual achievement, building new technologies, and growing new stuff was driving the planet. But all these wars, yes, the technologies are being used to kill people, but they also couldn't stop them. World War I was awful. World War I, go try to figure out what caused World War I. Seriously. There are treaties between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Germans that basically said, you know what, if something bad happens, we'll fight on your side. And something bad happened, and they fought. But no, try to figure out what was really going on. Go look that one up. You can use AI if you want. What caused, it'll tell you about the assassination of Franz Duke, all that. Nothing has caused that simply. But what is happening is these constant alliances and flipping back and forth. We're slowly building into major conflicts. And World War I was one which literally was a world war. You picked your sides. In those days, the Italians were on our side. We ate better. But we had World War I. And a guy who got the Spanish flu and lost his mind, Woodrow Wilson, who also happened to be a racist, Woodrow Wilson was basically someone, we got to stop doing this. This is stupid. I want to start the League of Nations. There are 14 points. If the world simply agrees to run itself under this sort of doctrine of 14 points, we won't have these wars. We'll have a League of Nations. But about that time, he lost his mind to a stroke, which is apparently due to the Spanish flu. And he couldn't even convince his own Congress to go along with those 14 points. He couldn't convince his own Congress to go into the League of Nations. He couldn't convince France not to pummel Germany into oblivion. And by the way, France, when Woodrow Wilson was unable to stop them, pummeled Germany into oblivion. By pummeling Germany into oblivion, they created these, once again, returning to these alliances. We call them the Axis. Austrians, sorry. Germans, Austria allowed Germany just to walk in. They were his fellow people. Japan, we had Mussolini in Italy. These factions started marching again to conquer the world. And it's all because France beat the crap out of Germany, extracted massive reparations, took over their coal mines, took over territories, Alsace-Lorraine, all kinds of stuff. They took as much as they could from Germany that the German people lived with. I need a suitcase full of cash to buy a cup of coffee or tea or whatever the hell they were buying. And that inflation and that complete and total destruction of the German economy helped the little guy who got arrested for doing some bad stuff. And then he had a little beer hall mess and wrote a book called Mein Kampf, which means literally my struggle, to slowly find a way to take over Germany, get rid of all the bans on building weapons, and start World War II. Thank you. Because the League of Nations couldn't do anything, and the United States was an isolationist country very, 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 very far away. The fact that the New Deal built massive hydroelectric power allowed the United States to build all the military hardware for all the allies, and the Japanese made it very clear, oh, well, now the United States has to join the war, and it has to join the war on the side of the UK and Europe and all that other stuff. But one more time, the world had an opportunity to create something that might stop these stupid alliances from happening, to find a place to resolve disputes other than war. And it was something that was very much created with a lot of American input. You may have heard of it. It's called the United Nations. It's headquartered, in New York City. And it's one of the institutions Donald Trump hates almost as much as he hates NATO. Because might makes right cannot coexist with an organization whose very essence is to diffuse conflicts, to stop countries from marching into other countries just to take them, to stop the political machinations that gave rise to the World War I, that gave rise to World War II. And pretty much after World War II, we had a couple of sidesteps. It didn't go so well. The Vietnam War was a mistake, and the war in Iraq, as I've just pointed out, was a mistake. But now there's this institution, and you have an American president, the most powerful country in the world, the economically richest country in the world, telling the world, effectively, the United Nations is a sack of shit, and NATO is a powerless hulk of dependent nations. Maybe they are, and it would be very funny if we went to take Greenland, and Denmark has an absolute law passed in 1952. Officers in an area where they are attacked. So in other words, if the United States were to send military forces to take over Greenland, and by the way, we're all over Greenland under a 1951 treaty because of mutual defense interests. But if American troops went into Greenland, a 1952 law mandates, without any prior permission being required, that the soldiers who are on guard, the Icelandic and the Danish soldiers, are mandated to shoot back. No questions asked. So I'm picturing F-35s diving and other F-35s flying against them. I don't get it. I don't understand why, when we already have our soldiers posted there, we need to take and own the country for national security reasons. And that's not why we're going there. Wake up. It's because the rare earths and all kinds of mineral wealth in Greenland, which has one of the largest land masses in the world with 57,000 people on it, has filled with stuff that we want. We want those minerals, and we don't want to pay for them. We want to take them. But Denmark is perfectly happy, and Greenland are perfectly happy to do output deals with minerals with American companies. You can have all that stuff. You don't have to come in here and take it. And we're not going to sell it to you. We may want to buy California. We make an offer. You might say, well, we don't want to sell you California. Well, a lot of people in the United States might let that happen. But if that were to happen, you would lose the fourth largest economy on earth. So before you think about that as a good thing, realize you kill California, you shoot yourself below the waist and between the ears. Not a good idea. All this notwithstanding, this is the world we are in. We're rekindling that colonial era. We're killing and totally crushing the period of enlightenment, which came from having great universities and lots of educated people and lots of research and lots of technological growth and lots of medical research and growth. And we put Robert Kennedy Jr. to run the research in the medical field. And we put Elon Musk, white racist of extraordinarily open feelings, be a tech leader. You can see how well he did with the Doge, Department of Governmental Excrement. I think I got that wrong. Oh, well, whatever it is, he didn't do anything, didn't save any money, but he sent hundreds of thousands of people out of work, pissed off entire communities. And if you buy a Tesla and make him wealthy, please don't do that. There's enough other cars out there. They're American-made cars. But, EVs right now, China easily outsells Tesla. And Tesla sales are in the toilet because people don't seem, for whatever reason, to like Elon Musk. And he's going out to space. He's controlling telecommunications and satellite communications through his Starlink stuff. And he's basically replacing NASA with his own rockets, which have occasionally blown up without apparently good reason for it. But so we're going out there and we have a very unpopular president. His approval ratings on the economy are so bad that approximately 76% of all Americans believe our economy is going in either totally in the wrong direction or partially in the wrong direction. So what happens now? We're pissing off our European allies. We're talking about conquering countries in ways that are very un-American and very undemocratic. We're imitating Putin. We're not imitating George Washington. We're not dealing with American values. And I have to read something that I aloud that I wrote a blog this morning, and I don't know what I did with it, but it was an interesting take on this. I will find it and I'll read it because it's a quote from Donald Trump being interviewed. Someone asked him, Jake Tapper on January 5th, asked Donald Trump, so are there any limits to what you can do internationally? Anything? And Trump said, no, there are no limits. The only limits are my own personal moral values, so I wouldn't do bad things. Okay, that makes me feel really comfortable. And if Congress doesn't wake them up to stand up and do what they were elected to do and contain this idiot, we have nothing to look forward to because what's going on, the exact quote here is, yeah, there's one thing, my own morality, my own mind, it's the only thing that can stop me. Well, that ain't gonna stop nobody. And I'll just make it very clear. People shooting mommies, 37-year-old mommies, who are trying to get away from very angry ICE agents with a cell phone hang in their hand and a gun in the other hand. And I've looked at every video and every angle of that, and there's no way in hell that deadly force was merited. So what happened at that point? What was done? Immediately, the Trump administration, Donald Trump, as before he saw the video, and Bam Bam Bondi immediately came out. And, Ice Barbie Gnome came out immediately, and J.D. Vance immediately came out and called this 37-year-old writer-poet, lily white American citizen, a Minnesotan blonde, and called her a domestic terrorist. And I'm thinking to myself, were those stuffed animals in the back of her mommy mobile, Honda Pilot, stuffed with, explosives? Was she really that sneaky? How do you reach a conclusion that she was a domestic terrorist and there's been no research? Nobody's investigated this. Well, okay, we'll have it investigated. So the state of Minnesota decided, well, we'll go investigate it. Bam Bam Bondi said, no, you're not. Only the FBI can investigate this. You guys can't even cooperate, which, by the way, when you have these kinds of killings, almost always have been cooperation between federal and state authorities. But Bam Bam said no. And Bam Bam Bondi, with no loyalty to any American I know except Donald Trump, basically said, it's no business of Minnesota's. This is exclusively federal jurisdiction. Not only will we not cooperate with the state review, we're not even going to let you do it. I'm sorry to tell you guys, but the medical examiner from Minnesota got there first. There's some evidence that you're going to need from the state. And that really terrifies me. And that's when JD, I can't believe that he has an initial that signifies that he went to law school, said that ICE agents have absolute immunity. Now think about that. A masked agent can go up to you and say, I think you're a domestic terrorist. Boom, I'm going to kill you. It's kind of like the Supreme Court immunity given to Donald Trump, isn't it? But now it's given to every damn ICE officer. You can kill anybody you want, and we're not even going to let people investigate it. We're just going to take it over. There's something profoundly morally bankrupt about that, which makes me wonder why Trump thinks his own mind is the barrier to his limitations on global power. What I'm saying, and in all of this stuff, is I'm pissed off, as you can tell. We can't tolerate this. Yes, protest. If I weren't physically more able, as you could tell, I use physical assistance in walking. I will tell you, I'd be out there every damn day. And I look at America. I look at the brave, ordinary Americans. They're just not militant. They're not particularly political. But you push them too hard, and Americans will stand up for all the American values that soldiers died in World War I, World War II. We have values. And every damn one of you vote, protest, do not tolerate it. And if there is a member of Congress in your district who has not stood up to tyrannical efforts on the part of Donald John Trump, throw him out of office. Don't let him stop. By the way, Trump said, I don't know why we're even having midterms. The Democrats have made such a mess of things. I don't think we should have them. But if I cancel them, I'm going to be called a dictator. Wait a minute. You're the one who said I'm going to be a dictator for one day and then decided to pick up and continue that mission? I'm sorry, America. I need your help. We need each other. We need to do this together. And I don't care if you're in MAGA, America First, or whatever. You can't win with a man who says whatever is on my mind, my adhocracy rules, and you got nothing to say about it. Because anybody who objects, I can kill you. We have people who can kill you with absolute immunity. I'm sorry. I love you all, and I hope to see you next time. I hope I'm in a better mood. We'll see each other next time. Thanks again. Peter Dekom signing off.
If you would like to give feedback, suggestions for new topics, or have a question that might be selected for a future podcast, please email us at dekompodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Until next time.